I appreciate the field promotion. I guess I'm a doctor now. I'm going to give you just a quick background on what it is that got me here tonight. In 1973, I took an ornithology class with Joe Gell at San Diego State. At the time, he was studying seabirds, and he was an early active member here at PSG. It was a great class. When it was over, he asked me if I wanted to do a trip on this boat. This is the Hero. This used to be the U.S. Antarctic Research vessel. And it was in dry dock in Long Beach, and it was going to deadhead to Tierra del Fuego. He got a grant to collect seabirds and make observations. He asked me if I wanted to go. I dropped out of college, never went back. Woo! That was 40-some years ago. When I got back from that trip, I managed to get myself on this boat as a bird and mammal observer. I'd already done one trip, so I was quite experienced, I guess. There was a lot of problems with tuna dolphins in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. First seiners were killing a couple of 100,000 dolphins a year, and NIMS sent out this boat to try to figure out what was going on out there, and they needed people to do survey work out there. And, I got on this boat, and actually by the time I was 40, I'd lived on this boat more than any place else on the planet. I've since rectified that. Okay, here's a picture of misspent youth. To be honest, I only did half of these, but that was still 1,600 days at sea. This is almost autobiographical. One of those lines there, I met my wife. So here's the areas that we work, and we had the opportunity to do a lot of our own science on the boat. We did oceanography, net tows, we did a whole, we did seabird observations everywhere we went. And I also took the opportunity that whenever we went by seabird islands, we would do an assessment to see what was there, because a lot of these places weren't visited. And this resulted in a number of short papers on the seabirds of Valijos Rocks, San Benedicto and Revillagigedos, Malpelo Island, and Clipperton. Clipperton is about as isolated an island as there is on the planet. It's about 650 miles west of Mexico. It's the only atoll in the entire Eastern Tropical Pacific. It's a near perfect atoll. It's got a rather large interior lagoon. It's about 4 kilometers across its largest dimension, and there's about 1.6 kilometers of exposed island there. So to give you an idea, that's the Jordan out there. It's a tiny place. And this is the only remnant of the original Clipperton Island, so it's not really an atoll. That's a rock there, volcanic plug. This is Clipperton Rock. It's about 90 feet tall. It's the most salient thing on the entire island. To the left there in the background across the lagoon is a grove of palm trees. And here's a close-up look at them. Coconut palms were introduced on the island by guano miners in 1890. And they've been on the island ever since then. The lagoon here is brackish. If it's been raining a lot, there'll be a lens of fresh water on there, which has some implications for the local ecology. So if you take these palm trees away, that's what Clipperton on the island should look like. It's coral rubble, coarse sand. It's a very low island. You can see along here where the waves have actually broken most of the way over the berm there. Welcome to the Anthropocene. This is the Clipperton recycling program here. We're putting down a geological layer. Now the lagoon is dotted with a few small islets, and they are heavily vegetated. This has to do with that fresh water there that collects there at times. This is beach morning glory and some sedges.
Wow.
Okay, just to give you some quick information about the offshore habitat at Clipperton Island. The Eastern Tropical Pacific is the most productive low-latitude waters in the world. and it's home to huge numbers of dolphins, especially spotted and spinner dolphins that you can see here. And almost every big group of spotted and spinner dolphins has flocks of seabirds that feed with them. And there's a relationship between the dolphins and large tuna. We still don't know why they co-occur like that. But the dolphins are nocturnal foraging. They feed mostly on the scattering lay organisms that come up at night. They use their sonars. The tunas, on the other hand, are visual predators. They feed during the daytime, and it's an important feeding source for all the birds in the eastern Pacific. And this is actually, these are large tunas that co-occur with these dolphins. They chase large prey, and large tropical seabirds make a living with them. And that's that fuzzy character there. Me sometimes. Okay. These tuna dolphin schools are not randomly distributed in the eastern tropical Pacific, but the currents have a lot to do with how they are distributed. Two main currents here: the North Equatorial Countercurrent. It's warm, low saline, comes from the Western Pacific, hits Central America, whips around, and starts heading back across again. The Costa Rica Dome is an area of important upwelling because of the Coriolis effect. And it joins the North Equatorial Current. The boundary between these two currents is a thermocline ridge. It doesn't really upwell, but there's it's an important area of productivity. And there's where Clipperton Island is on that boundary. And this shows that thermocline ridge right here. And here's the Costa Rica Dome. These are two very important areas of productivity. And it shows here in this map, this is a map of yellowfin tuna tonnage caught in 1 year in the eastern Pacific. Costa Rica Dome is over here. Here's this thermocline ridge here. This is where the tuna dolphins are. Oh, there's where Clipperton Island is. So this is the best place to have a tropical breeding colony in the world, I think. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to some of the citizenry of Clipperton Island. This is the most prominent citizen there. These are masked boobies. And on the research vessel we had a helicopter, and we could fly and take pictures of the island and go back and count the boobies. And our highest count was 112,000 masked boobies. This is the biggest colony, the biggest seabird, tropical seabird in the world. And I would guess over half of the world's masked boobies breed on this island. Masked boobies lay 2 eggs. They have 1 chick. They have obligate siblicide. The older or more healthy chick boots out the younger one, and so every masked booby on the island is an only child. It's kind of like living in China, I guess. Notice the yellow bill here, because there's another booby on the island with an orange bill, and we recognized pretty early on in these cruises that there's 2 flavors of masked boobies in the eastern tropical Pacific. Orange ones that are down mostly around the Galapagos Islands, and a yellow-billed bird mostly in the north. And during one of our early trips, I remember walking around Clipperton Island, tens of thousands of yellow-billed birds, and I looked down and there was a pair of orange-billed birds nesting together. And this is for field biologists, this is one of those oh my god moments. Assortative breeding right here. Joe Dell and I described it as a separate species, masked booby, and it was later confirmed by Dickie Freezer genetically. So there are, I think our maximum count on the island is about 18, so there's not a whole lot there. Real quick about where these things occur. This is where the orange-billed version breeds. Malpelo has about 80,000. The Galapagos has 15 or 20,000, so about 100,000 of those guys. This is where the yellow-billed ones are. Clipperton has about 100, 110,000. There's another 5,000 in San Benedicto, and there's a handful of the orange bills that breed north. I haven't seen any yellow ones downside, but they're pretty clearly segregated here. And some nest boobies, I guess, are colorblind. They do hybridize a little bit, but not much. There's a lot of brown boobies on Clipperton. From our aerial surveys, I think 25,100 was our high count. That's the second largest brown booby colony in the world. It belongs to the Brewsteri race. The males have white heads. Most of the brown boobies in the world, the males have dark heads, like the females. Not sure what that's about, but it's very interesting. Quite often when you see entire roosts of adult males sitting together, clearly there's something going on here with boobies that we don't know about. And I've seen flocks of 100, 150 boobies at sea, and they're all males with these white heads. So there's some interesting sexual segregation going on. And brown boobies, in most places they breed in association with vegetation. Clipperton's a good deal, there's no vegetation, so they do what they can, mostly with bird bones and bird feathers. And they also make good use of some of that plastic that's such an irritation in the ocean. And it looks like combs and bottle caps are what they're really after. There are some red-footed boobies that breed on the island. We've counted up to 250. They would love to nest there, but there isn't much habitat for them. They're tree nesters. They don't like to nest in palms because I think they wave around too much when the wind blows. So there's a few places where they've fallen down and they can nest. If there were trees on Clipperton, this would probably be one of the biggest red-footed booby colonies in the world. Frigate birds on Clipperton Island, we have counted up to 1,500 at any one time, and there was no breeding there historically. Mostly great frigate birds. We've seen a few magnificent and a couple of lesser over the years. In 2005, this is the first egg ever recorded on Clipperton by a frigate bird, and I'll talk about this in a minute. They don't like those palm trees either. They roost and nest on the ground. This is a red-tailed tropic bird. There's like 2 nests on Clipperton. They like to nest under shrubs. There's no shrubs at Clipperton. Very few of these breed in the eastern Pacific anyway. Sooty terns, we've seen maybe 1,500. Sometimes there are dozens of nests. They only nest on those little islets. We'll talk about why shortly, but there's not a lot of space for them. Brown noddies, maybe another 1,500. Sometimes we get a few dozen nests. They also try to get on those islets in the lagoon. We've seen a few black noddies. They're tree nesters, and they don't like to nest in the palms either. So I think we've seen maybe 40 is the most at any one time. A few white terns, again, tree nesters, they don't do so well there. We've seen 30 or 40 of them at different times. You can see when Clipperton was a big island, probably had soil and trees on it. These tree nesters there were probably zillions of them, but they're kind of losing out now. Wedge-tailed shearwater, talk about losers. There's no soil on the island. We've seen a total of two burrows since we've been there and 1 nesting pair. They just can't dig into the coral rocks. Here's a burrow right here. It looks like he's rolled the rock out of the way there. Okay, so basically what we have at Clipperton Island, if you're a large ground nester, you're in. Everything else is small change. There are no land birds that breed on Clipperton Island, no place for them to. There are 2 water birds that have bred there, coots and moorhens. And it's sometimes you go there and you can find a small population. Sometimes they're breeding. Most of the time they're not. I think it depends on what's going on with the water in the lagoon. Coots kind of come and go. You know, you get used to how seabirds do things, and then to think about a coot blown off course 1,000 miles, ends up at Clipperton Island, looks around and says, yeah, let's nest here. Anyway, I don't know why a chick would want to look like this. It's drawing attention to itself. Okay, another very important citizen of Clipperton Island is this orange land crab. It used to be the genus Jacarcinus, and now it's Jungarthia. Actually, this meeting, I've seen these orange land crabs from quite a few of the islands that have been discussed in the paper sessions here. This is an endemic species to Clipperton Island. They mostly come out at night, or if a cloud goes in front of the sun, they'll pop out real quick. They feed on algae around the lagoon, any kind of vegetation they will eat. But for the most part, I think they subsist on what the boobies bring back and drop, including if they fall over dead, or if they excrement, they feed on that quite a bit. And this is what a booby chick looks like after one night with the crabs. It's become nesting material. And when you look around Clipperton Island up until fairly recently, this is what you would see in the way of palm trees. Mature palm trees and dead palm trees. And this is the reason why. The crabs were eating every single coconut that dropped off the trees. This was a population of 50-plus-year-old palm trees, and you can see they were starting to die off. I was getting pretty excited to think about having Clipperton Island without having those palm trees on there. They just don't look right there. The only other animals on the island are 2 lizards. There's a gecko, which was introduced some time ago, and then possibly a subspecies of skink. A brief look at human history there. In 1897, the guano miners came out, and they were there until 1917. During that time, the Mexicans laid claim to the island. They had a small garrison there. And they had up to 100 people there on the island at that time, which is just hard to imagine. They were supplied by vessels from the mainland mainly. They brought their own coconuts. You can see they had to put them in planter boxes because the crabs would have got to them. One of the supply ships that was coming out there hit the reef and sank, and Clipperton Island had pigs after that. During the Second World War, there was concern about the Japanese moving in and building an airstrip or something, so that there was a preemptive strike. The U.S. Navy went out there and occupied the island for a year, and then they moved out. Since then, nobody has lived permanently on the island, but it gets visited quite often by scientific expeditions, fishermen, and the like. So, 1958 was a milestone for Clipperton. It was the International Geophysical Year. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography sent a team of 13 scientists to Clipperton Island to study the wildlife there and the biota. And this is what the island looked like when they got there. Here's a color photo that remains. 2 biologists on board. Helen Marie Sachet was a botanist, and Ken Stager was the ornithologist. He was the curator of birds at the Los Angeles County Museum. They quickly realized that this was not the Clipperton they expected. They expected a huge seabird colony, tons of crabs, and no vegetation. Instead, they had pigs roaming around on Clipperton Island after 50 years, and it looked like this. Ken estimated there were 150 masked boobies on the island. So, Sachet, the botanist, said, when she wrote about it, the pigs were responsible for bringing back a better equilibrium between the flora and fauna of the atoll. She liked the weedy look. Ken, on the other hand, was not having anything to do with his equilibrium theory. And he brought a shotgun and was expecting to collect quite a few birds. There were very few there. He shot 58 pigs, and his comment was that he hoped that this would aid in restoring Clipperton Island as an important breeding ground for oceanic birds in the eastern Pacific. Ken, you have no idea. Okay, 2005, pigs are gone, plants are gone, the island is overrun with birds and crabs. Things are back the way they should be. Nice job. This shows what one person can do on an island. So in 2005, Lisa and I got invited by the French to participate in an expedition going to Clipperton Island, and it would, we thought this would be a good opportunity to study the food habits of masked boobies. So we joined a replacement scientific party, got on this boat in Acapulco, the Rare Aves, off to an auspicious start. 2-day sail out to Clipperton. When we get there, the dining hall's already been built. The guy on the far left, he's a 3-star French chef. We brought cases of wine, for lunch and dinner. If you're going to do an expedition, I highly recommend, signing up with the French. Here's our power grid. The boobies loved it, had to clean it every day. Here's some workspaces and living spaces. They had a dive tent. They did a lot of dive operations there. Lisa and I had our own ornithology lab. We had our own private boudoir. Also had a security guard there. Okay, this guy in the lower left here, he was the general contractor on the island. He fixed everything, and he was a virtuoso with the chainsaw. He made this little, this was his own abode here he made, and I like this waterproofing on the roof here. He gave us showers. Blue with the That's a great way to start your day on the island. He was a furniture maker. And he was a sculptor. I'd like to have this in my living room. And this was Jean-Louis Etienne. He's a famous French polar explorer, and he's the expedition leader. Here he is interviewing a pair of brown movies for live broadcast in classrooms in France. Of course, if you're going to be on a French expedition, you're going to need entertainment at night, so they have an acrobat from Paris come out. And this is a younger Charlie Boss in Climber Sturge's group who was there doing some instrumenting birds also. So, Clipperton Island during the daytime, it can be oppressively hot. The smarter ones go into the shade. So we worked for several hours in the morning, and then we especially worked in the evening. And if you're going to do a food habit study, evening is the time to do it. Clipperton is fairly barren during the daytime. Everybody goes to work. In the evening, they come back. There's a lot of reading, a lot of large mass booby chicks on the island. It's a perfect time to do a food habit study. So what we do every evening, we walk out in the colony, find a different place every night with a bunch of large chicks around and just stand there. And there was scores of adult boobies flying around, lots of air traffic there. They're all squawking, and then all of a sudden one of the chicks would liven up right in front of you and start flapping. And you have to go to that chick because the adult is going to come down. I like how they always throw this wing around the back here. You're not going anywhere. And the delivery takes place. Now, my job here is to break up that tidy little arrangement. And basically what I do is when the chick gets agitated, I run over to her with my fishing net. Throw the net over the parent, mom or dad, grab behind the neck, turn it upside down, and dump out the goodies. Now we take the bird and the net back over to our workstation, measure, weigh the bird, record the sex. When they come in, they've got a distinct call, and you can tell them apart pretty easily. Let mom or dad go. A little background here real quick too. On our cruise, another little study that we did was looking at flying fish, species and distribution, relative abundance in the eastern tropical Pacific. Every night while we're doing oceanography, we'd go out for an hour and catch as many of these little rascals as we could. And it started out just to learn something about the food habits of birds, but it kind of took on a life of its own, and we ended up with over 2,500 dip net stations. We caught over 50,000 individual prey fish at night, and 22 species of flying fish. So it was a good time to do a mass booby study because we know something about flying fish out there. So this is the kind of stuff that you get out of a load of mass booby barf, and this is pretty good. This is as I hoped it would be. These are, I know what all these are just by looking at them. I've had them wriggling in my hand thousands of times. There's 2 winged flying fish, and there's 4 winged flying fish. The 4 winged flying fish have oops, back that up. Oops. I'll get you. Okay, so These are two-winged flying fish, Exocetus. These are four-winged. This is a short-winged flying fish. It's kind of a flying half-beak. They're all identifiable. We have regressions for length to weight for all of these things, and partial regressions in case we get somewhat digested fish. So we can reconstitute the original size of this whole thing and be done with it. I didn't have to bring anything back from this trip. Because of the wings on flying fish, boobies always have to swallow them head first. And you can see that what happens here is they end up digesting the head first. But it's kind of interesting. These guys have been flying around out there all day, packing on this chow, and this is all that is digested in this. And they must have some way of shutting down the digestion, because at that rate it's going to take them a week to digest all the rest of this. So something's going on with their abilities to bring back prey like this. So a lot of this fish is in pretty good shape. A lot of flying fish identification, you just open it up and look at the wing patterns and color, and you can identify them. And, all this stuff is immediately identifiable. We learned some things about flying fish here too. This is Cyclops colopterus. It's a species found on the shelf off Mexico and Central America. I was really surprised. We got a couple of them out at Clipperton. Another fairly important prey item is tuna. It's oxus. It only gets to be about a foot and a half long. It's a very dense fish. They didn't catch very many of them, but because they're so heavy, they end up being a little more important. They caught a lot of little squid. These are omestrephids, purple-backed flying squids, phenoteuthis. Typically, they catch either a bunch or none. You can tell they get into a school of them. So, and these are flying squid. We'll talk about them in a minute. The best part of the whole study was, as soon as we had measured, weighed, and identified everything, we go back to the chick that was supposed to get it and feed them. So, okay, this is Photoshop, but I want to do a couple of things here. Flying fish almost all of them live 1 year. They're annuals. Things happen very fast for fish out there in the ocean. The bigger ones can live 2 years. The thing to note here is the lower lobe of the tail here. So I'm going to talk about flying fish for just a minute, just because they're pretty cool. Okay, so that enlarged lower lobe is for allowing them to taxi on the water. If it's windy out, they just jump into the wind and they're gone. If it's calm like this, they're going to have to taxi for a while, and they'll lift their tail and fly for 100 yards, 200 yards. And if there's something chasing them, they'll drop the tail and kick it again and go back up. And they can actually go quite a ways if they need to. For the most part, they are the only fish that's in their size range at the surface in the tropics. And it's because they fly. If you're going to be a fish this big in the tropics, you fly or you die. And even if you do fly, sometimes you're going to be prey to the fish out there. Of course, once you get in the air, then you're going to attract other attention. And boobies, I think they've evolved to eat flying fish. Everything they do is centered on eating this rather large fish out there. Mass boobies are 100% plunge divers. They're big and heavy. The brown boobies, they can catch flying fish in the air, but they like to wait for them to go in and then dive in after them. And redfoots almost invariably try to take it out of the air. They're smaller, more agile, and they have to come in right behind the flying fish. If they don't, the flying fish will see them, wait till they come close, and the flying fish will just drop in the water. And if they can come in behind them, grab them, toss them up in the air, swallow them head first. They do it every single time. In fact, if a mass booby catches one underwater, they'll get to the surface, throw it up, and swallow it head first. If you figure in round numbers that mass boobies take 5 flying fish a day, they probably take more than that. For 20 years, that's 35,000 flying fish per bird there. So they get a lot of practice catching these things. As you all know, free birds can't sit on the water. They soar for weeks or months at a time in the air. The fact that there's flying fish out there allows them, I think, to have evolved. because a lot of the prey that they catch is flying fish out of the air. Wedge-tailed shearwaters are an important part of these flocks also. They have a much smaller beak, much smaller gape. Sometimes you see them catch a big flying fish, they'll fly them, but they are happy to catch the little ones. This is interesting to me. You know, a lot of like bird taxonomy turns on color patterns in birds. You know, and this is how they recognize different species. Flying fish have a lot of color variation and pattern variation in the wings. None of the taxonomy is based on this. They probably use these same colors to identify species also, but all the preserved specimens have lost all their color. There's no color descriptions in the taxonomy of any of the flying fish. I think they missed out on some important stuff here. And flying squid. We see these fairly often in the eastern tropical Pacific, and it's kind of interesting because they're all small ones. And I put this out because this diet study taught us some things about these flying squid. The squid here is in the blue, and here you can see the lengths here, and it gets up to about 110 millimeter mantle length, and then they're not in the diet anymore. And these squids get up to probably 200, 250 millimeters, so they get a lot bigger. They just don't occur at the surface at that time. At that point, either they get too big to fly, or they get big enough so they can do the diel migration. But they drop out of the diet at that point, and it's because there's been a life change for them. So we had ended up with 197 food loads, 1,800 prey items, and 50 kilograms of prey. That's quite a bit. They eat a lot, those nasty boobies. And we ended up estimating every day 40 metric tons of flying fish and 2 metric tons of squid move on to Clipperton Island. It's enough to feed a lot of crabs. So real quick on some of the stuff that we found. In terms of mass, 92% is fish. In terms of number, 75% fish. The cephalopods really jump up. They catch quite a few, but they're quite small, so they don't really add a lot to their diet. And this is the takeaway thing here. Flying prey by mass, 86%, and by number caught, 93%. Just about everything that they eat for a living is trying to escape tunas, dolphins, or our boat. So they feed on flying prey almost exclusively, and this is an indication of how dependent they are on tunas and dolphins. And the take home here to me is, when you're managing for tunas, you are actually managing for birds too, and this never comes up in discussions about tuna management. I think it's a problem. We saw a lot of birds with these deformed wings. This has a lot of names called twist wing. Most often it's called angel wing. This bird will never fly. It'll never leave the colony. They are not sure what causes this. It's common on Clipperton Island. It can be genetic because none of these birds ever breed, and so we're not sure what it comes from. It's most common. It's rarely recorded in wild birds. It's most common in waterfowl, and I think it's a protein deficiency, but that can't be the problem here. Just about all they eat is protein, unless it's a food deficiency. Most of the time it's just one wing. Quite often it's two wings. And we did a survey around the island and estimated that there were just over 500 chicks in this condition, and which was about 5% of the chick production that year. So it's very common. I've never been to Clipperton and not seen chicks standing around with this. And this is interesting because this chick is a chick from at least 1 year before. It's at least 1 year old. It could be 2, and it's still being fed by its parents. And there were a couple of these. You can see here's the wing prop over here. This bird's never going to fly. It's an adult, still being fed by its parents. It's probably at least 3 years old, could be 4 years old. Again, we don't know what causes this problem, but if it's a feeding deficiency for a fish-eating seabird, this is something I think could or should show up on other seabird colonies elsewhere. And I just put this out for people to be looking for this sort of thing. Like I say, it's rarely recorded in wild birds. It's very common on Clipperton Island. Okay, so what are the threats to Clipperton Island? One of them is ownership. For the most part, it's considered French property. The Mexicans have a kind of a tenuous claim. It's a little bit uncertain right now, depending on who you ask. So the French, they bring their boat up from Tahiti once or twice a year. They run up the flag, paint the monument, replace the plaque, which is always missing. But during the 80s and early 90s, in order to kind of bolster their claim, the French government tried to get developers to develop the island so they could make it more French, I guess. Anyway, what they wanted to do was dredge or dynamite a passageway into the lagoon, put in either this a yacht harbor or a deep water tanker turnaround basin in there. They wanted a floating hotel and big fuel tanks on there and stuff. But fortunately, I think they finally read some of those accounts of hurricanes going right over top of Clipperton Island. And that was enough to dampen the developers' ardor, and that threat has passed. This is a continuing threat. This is a tuna purse seiner, and every year they take 130,000 tons of yellowfin tuna out of the eastern tropical Pacific. The majority of that is tuna that is stripped away from dolphin schools and tuna that makes prey available to the birds. The management of yellowfin tuna in the eastern Pacific looks only at dolphin mortality. It doesn't even try to figure out what might be happening to the birds out there that are losing this resource, or what's happening to the dolphins. When you split up that relationship, is it what happened? And they don't even want to consider that issue. Other problems? The ship was going from Panama to South Korea. They went up on the reef, 16 knots, 2 guys on the bridge at the time. The good news here was this happened in 2010, the ship was built in 2009, and it was double hulled. They lighted off 20,000 metric tons of solvent and soybean oil and were able to refloat it off and take the ship to port. So that's kind of the best news that's happened in Clipperton in quite a while, I guess. Okay. In the year 2000, when we went to Clipperton, we found 2 Mexican fishing boats that had been thrown up on the beach by a recent storm. And among the passengers that got ashore was the usual, black rat. And Clipperton is a pretty tough place to make a living. Figured there was probably better than 50-50 chance the rats wouldn't make it. We saw a couple of them around the island. But when Lisa and I went there in 2005, we started walking over the grove. I saw this, and I knew that the rats had won. Turns out the rats eat crabs, and much like the pigs that ate the crabs, when you get rid of the crabs, the vegetation starts to come back. Clipperton was starting to change. And here's another view from over by the grove area too. These are all weedy species that I don't know. I can't believe they were part of some original seed bank. It's been too long since anything was growing there. Probably comes out with birds or blown offshore or in the boots of fishermen or something. But there's quite a diverse array of plant life on Clipperton Island these days. And as you can imagine, mass boobies aren't going to breed in that. Red-footed boobies aren't going to breed in that, and brown boobies might find a few places, but it's going to change things. So back to this picture. Storrs Olson recently described a new species of frigate bird from South Trinidad Island in the Atlantic. And they used to be forested, and it's a highly endangered species now. And he said he thought that originally it probably nested on the Big Island in trees, but since there are no trees, they could possibly breed on the ground. But he says he doesn't think that they do because there's a large land crab there, John Garthia, very similar to Clipperton crab. And he said he didn't think that they could breed there because of that crab. So at Clipperton, the frigate birds are starting to breed there now, and it probably has to do with the fact that the crab numbers are way down because of the rats. I'm not sure how well frigate birds fare with rats, especially on the ground, but it looks like they were happy to trade them to the crabs. And who knows, maybe they'll be the biggest frigate bird colony in the world here before too long. Okay, the other thing that has happened is this small grove here. These are all old and dying palm trees, but for the first time since I've been going there in 25 years, you can see all these coconuts sprouting under at the base of these trees here. There are few crabs left on the island. The palm trees are sprouting now, and I don't think it's going to be very long before Clipperton Island is an unbroken palm forest. And the ground nesters are going to have little or no place to breed. The tree nesters don't particularly like these, so things are changing. Okay, so this is Clipperton in 2005 when we were there. The rats were quite entrenched. On our expedition, there were two guys that came out that were going to try to trap and poison rats and get them off the island. They were there for about 3 days and said, this is too big. So even by 2005, there were too many rats for them to deal with. As soon as I got back, I contacted Island Conservation and asked them if they were interested in this. And actually, I was told that there weren't any endemic species, bird species there, and so they weren't going to be able to take it on. And if you have limited resources, I have to admit, I have to agree with that. Endemic species are important, but world-class bird colonies are also important. But as you'll see, I think they made the right decision, and I certainly don't blame them for the actions that they took there. But this is what most of what Clipperton still looked like in 2005, a desert island. But we knew changes were happening. Okay, so this is Clipperton Island in 2015. This bare spot here, this is where the waves break up on the beach. That's the only reason. It's now this lurid, unnatural golf course. And the low stuff is spreading everywhere. These little palm groves here, they are thickening up. You can tell they're spreading. And it's not going to be long before none of the ground nesters are going to be there. So, what's the future of Clipperton Island? I don't think there is a future. This thin white line here, this is Clipperton Island. It's not going to take much sea level rise, and it's not going to take much changes in hurricane forces there. And we're going to see this thin white line disappear under the waves at Clipperton Island. I was trying to think of a positive note to end this on, but there is no positive note here. And this is going to happen in a lot of atolls and those birds that breed on atolls. So I think we're going to have to get used to this kind of message. But I have to tell you, since coming to this meeting and listening to the stories and papers that we heard here, I've turned around my message here. What's being done to restore islands in the Channel Islands. You know, we heard about an island off Korea, and the amazing stuff that's going on these Mexican islands now. And this is what we got to do. We got to save what we can. We're not going to be able to save these low islands, but there's a lot of work that can be done on these hot islands. I was at South Georgia in November.
Give up the mic. Yeah,
What? Oh. Okay, I was in South Georgia in November.
You need new batteries.
Okay. And most of you are probably aware that they've been involved in a rat eradication project there for the last 4 or 5 years. They're into the second year of having dropped the rat poison, and they still haven't seen a rat yet on the island. Right now they're involved in a survey around. They're taking dogs. And putting out baited traps all around the island. It must be tough getting up every morning and wondering if you're going to hear about that one rat. One rat ruins the whole thing. But so far, they have, if not found any rats. Since I've been going there, I've only seen a couple of South Georgia pipits. I've only seen the pintail a couple of times. They were on rocks offshore. When I was there in November, pipits were everywhere. Pintails were everywhere, all over the main island. Everywhere we went, they were flying out to the boat. This must be the most dramatic recovery of a critically endangered species to least concern. It took them about 4 years. Anyway, that's what can happen on some of these islands. We're going to have big tragic losses like Clipperton here. What we have to work for are those spectacular victories still out there, like South Georgia. And it's going to take commitment and work by people like in this room and by this organization.